Okay, well, welcome everybody. This is
We're waiting 1 second because I'm trying to live stream to YouTube at the same time.
okay.
So it says it's setting up the webinar for YouTube Live.
Okay, well, welcome everybody.
We're good to go.
Okay, well, welcome everybody. This is the October 14th meeting of the Finance Committee of the Council Rock School Board of Directors. I want to call the meeting to order. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to ask us all to go around and introduce ourselves. I'm going to start with Dr. Frazier.
Good evening, everyone. Robert Frazier, Superintendent.
Bob?
Hi, everyone. Bob Bruchak. I'm the interim business manager here at Council Rock.
Mr. Solomon?
Hey, good evening, Ed Salomon, School Board.
All right, how about I just do a little roll call. Andy Black?
Andy Block, School Board. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah. Mike Thorwart?
Mike Thorwart, School Board.
Ed Tate? Ed Tate is here. He's muted. Kristen Marcel, please.
Kristen Marcel, School Board.
Okay. And then we just have Cheryl from the Finance Office.
Yes, hi, Cheryl Rabonnet.
And Kevin is on. I'm sorry, we have Kevin Carpuck from Cornerstone and Zach Willard from PFM joining us. Am I missing anyone? I don't think so. Matt Frederickson is our host. Okay, so I'm going to turn this over to our interim business manager. Bob, if you can take over from here, and I'll keep an eye out for raised hands and interject as needed. Is that okay?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mark. Okay, the first item that we have, and these are discussion items, are for informational purposes. We do have an upcoming bond issue that we're looking to take down for projects that we've been investing in. And we have Zach Willard from PFM who will be doing the presentation concerning there's actually two bond issues that we're looking at doing. One would be a refunding of the 2017 general obligation bond, and the other would be for new money. And I will let Zach from PFM take it from there.
Okay, great. Thanks, Bob. So I'm going to share my screen. Can everybody see that?
Yes, sir.
Put it in full screen mode. Okay. So yeah, so Zach Willard from PFM. So every time about this year, we come back in the fall and we talk about what we expect for kind of the next calendar year's worth of financings. You know, sometimes it's a refinancing, sometimes it's for a new project, a new borrowing, and sometimes it's both. And so this year it's going to be a combination of the two. We have a refinancing opportunity again, and we also have a potential new borrowing for some projects. So I'm going to zoom in as best I can here as we walk through this. So just a real quick recap at the top, it talks about earlier this year, we borrowed $25 million for the Hillcrest Elementary School project and the turf field project. And in conjunction with that, you did have a very small refinancing opportunity. And because interest rates are so incredibly low, we were still able to eke out, around $254,000 of savings, which we used and structured to help offset some of the payments from the new bond. Okay. So what we're talking about for the 2022 calendar year is preparing for refinancing of the 2017 bonds. There's about 9.2 million outstanding. The call date is May of 2022. But what that really means is you can lock in interest rates in the middle of January, kind of the early to middle part of January. So we will prepare for that. The current rates on that 17 range from a 2.15% to just above a 3% fixed rate. And while those rates sound like they are pretty low, because they are, current rates are just that much lower. And we're expecting if you did this today, you'd probably save, somewhere around $500,000 through refinancing. Okay. So that's the first piece of the 2022 plan. The second piece, which has been kind of part of this master plan for the capital projects that we've been going through each year, and we'll show you a familiar page in just a second, is item number 4. It's expected that you're going to need about $19.5 million. And what that's going to be used for is funding the remaining portion of Hillcrest, Sulphine-Stone, and various other capital improvements of the district. The plan would be, in this specific scenario, to issue these two bonds 15 days apart. And the reason we've done that in the past, last year we did not do that, but in previous years we've done that to take advantage of what's called a bank qualified status of your bonds. And there's a little review down here at the bottom. And just a refresher, if you can issue $10 million or less of a refinancing and keep it 15 days apart from any other type of financing, you get typically better interest rates. And what's actually proved to be the most valuable proponent of this bank qualified is the 5-year call feature, which has allowed the district all these different refinancing opportunities through the years. Even the 2017 bonds, we did those bank qualified, and that's why 5 years later we're able to refinance them. So that would be the plan, is to kind of get out early in January of 2022 with the refinancing. And then assuming that you do want to move forward with the new money, we would come back approximately 15 days later and do that transaction. So I'm going to pause real quick. Is there any questions or thoughts? Okay, so let's skip down here to the interest rate chart that we show you each time we're here. And really, it doesn't change much. The bottom half of the chart, you can see, goes back to January of 2020. There was the big spike when COVID hit. We're all the way to the right. And you can see, well, rates are off kind of the all-time low. They're still at, what we considered historic lows, and an all-time low just only 12 months ago. When you look at the middle chart, you can kind of see where we are compared to the last, 30 or so years. So between the low rates, the district's good credit rating, and the 5-year call feature, that's what kind of creates this opportunity for the refinancing and also to lock in very low rates on your new project. This page is what we call your debt summary. Okay, just a refresher for everybody, the top half shows the various bond issues you have. Okay, over in the far right in column 14 are your annual
Can I interrupt you, Zach? Is there a way to make that a little larger, just so the people at home can see that a little bit better? Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
So column 14 is what your annual debt service payments are. That's your principal and interest when you add up all the different bond issues. And you'll note that it's kind of level at, about 18.5 million, then it drops down to 15.5 million, then 13, and so on. Okay, that's by design based on the plans for additional new money that we have. The bottom half of this chart is what we call the local effort. And so what it is it's all the payments above, but you do receive reimbursement from the state via PlanCon on some of your older issues. And so these are the net payments after the state reimbursements received. So the way it works is the business office pays each individual payment twice a year, and then you submit to PDE for reimbursement on some of the bond issues. Okay, so that's the net number in column 28. And then over in the highlighted column 18, that's the 2017 months. That's what we're planning to refund. And we're going to take the old higher rates, as I said, replace them with today's new lower rates. We're not going to extend the debt. It's going to have the same final maturity, just a lower interest rate. And that's what will save the money. Okay, so that's just a little review there. And so now here's the summary page that we've been following, I think, all the way back to 2014 now. And so I'm going to try to go through this quick. There's two versions of this page. This is the current version as you all know it after that last financing. And I'll try to zoom in here so you can see a little better. So column 2 shows the estimated 2022 refunding. You can see it saves about $439,000. Okay. And in column 12, it shows how the savings is going to happen. You're not going to get all the savings up front. Because of the way the old bond issue is structured, you're going to get savings over time, of about $70,000 up front, and then about, somewhere between $25,000 and $35,000 every year after. Okay. So that's the refinancing. Column 4 in the orange, the 2022 new money, that would be the next step in the financing plan. So column 3, as you can see, it says final. That was the borrowing that you did early this year for the projects. So this would be the new 2020 borrowing. You can see which projects it funds. And then if you scroll down to the bottom here in column 15, you can see the estimated debt payments. And these numbers are a little conservative because we're still a few months away. We would expect, if we did this today, to do better than this. And so that shows the $20 million and the impact of the debt. Now, if you recall before, we were structuring all the various bond issues, as you can see, all have the same final maturity, which is in 2046. Okay, so over here on the far left, you can see the budget year 6/30/2046, and we had tied all the bond issues to end there. Okay, at the time they were just about 25-year borrowings. So now as I scroll over to the right, you're going to see 3 more borrowings, future estimated borrowings that haven't been approved yet, but it's just how you would fund these projects that are on the slate now. So you see the 23 new money in column 5, the 24 in column 6, and then in column 7, there's a small cleanup borrowing, small compared to the rest of the numbers. So at the end of the day, when all the dust settles, you're going to be in column 8, which shows that you've funded about $97 million worth of projects. Below it lists the projects. And then in column 19 in the green, it shows what your annual budgeted payments would be, assuming that you moved forward with some version of this plan. And so what it shows is you're going to be about 18, 19, the high point is 20 million. Then your existing debt actually drops off. And that was what I mentioned earlier, that was by design to drop off. And then you're going to run at kind of that $18 million number in your budget. And then in a few years, it drops down to 16.7 million and so on. Currently, what you have in your debt service budget now is column 21. That's what shows up in your budget, 18,766,000. Okay, so right now, you do have enough in your budget as it sits now to fund all of these projects under these estimated interest rates, with the exception of 2 years where you see in column 20, there's a negative 245,000 and a negative 1.3 million. In those 2 years, you will likely go above your budgeted debt service. What the district has done after the last bond issue was you set up a debt service fund that has money available in there to make the payments that go above the 18.766 budgeted number. Okay.
And Zach, if I can just jump in there real quickly, just for community members who are watching as well as the board's sake, you'll remember that this is the one-time payment that we talked about spread across 2 different years when the Sulfinestone project was approved. And you'll recall that the dollar amount that we were anticipating at that time, if I recall correctly, was 2.37 million. So that's what we set aside into that particular fund balance. And you can see between that 245,000 and the 1.37 million, we're more like 1.6 million at this point. So just a bit of favorable news there relative to the 2.37 that we had been talking about back in May and June.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And, we hope to have that number be even smaller. If interest rates remain this low through January and you do the next step of the borrowing at these kind of low rates, hopefully that number will be, the needed number for your debt service fund will be even lower. So that's the plan the way it stands now. Okay. I have a timeline I'm going to show you in a second, but before we do that, I'm going to show you the same page. Okay. And I want you to keep an eye on 2 things. So when you look in column 19, you can see how your debt service would look in this hypothetical scenario, okay? And what it does is it shows that you're going to be, actually, let's look at column 20. So what column 20 shows you is it shows you the difference between your actual payments and what's in the budget. So you're going to have a few years, the 2 years that we just talked about, where you're going to be above the budget. And then every year after that, you're going to be below what you have budgeted in your debt service number, to the tune of, $2 million a year a few years from now. Out in 2029, okay? And then if you look at the bottom of column 19, you can see what the total debt service cost would be over the life for all this, all these projects and all your existing debt. So now if we go to the next page, this is the same scenario. It's borrowing the same amount of money. But what we did was we extended the borrowings out 3 years. So in columns 15, 16, and 17, instead of having each bond issue end in 2046, they now end, actually 4 years, they now end in 2050, I believe. Scroll over here, in 2050, okay? And so when you look in column 20, what it does is it shows you have more capacity for future projects. So fast forward, you get through this borrowing plan, it's 2029, and the district has additional needs for other buildings and other facilities around Council Rock. You know, this scenario would leave you more flexible for any future plans that you have. And if you decide not to do anything, you know, that's fine too. But this is meant to kind of think forward that you may have other things. It might be a good idea either on this next borrowing or maybe the 2023 borrowing to start considering moving out the final maturity of these new projects that you're doing, you know, 1 or 2 or 3 years, and doing, you know, we talk about this each time, each fall, so that you can build additional debt capacity for the future. Okay. So that's one thing that we want to consider for this next borrowing is, do we want to have a final maturity of 2046 or do we want to have a final maturity of 2050?
Clarifying question.
Yes, sir.
So I'm under the impression that the rollover for these buildings is 30 years. And you're now suggesting we borrow money over a 30-year term, correct?
This would actually be a 28-year term.
Okay, so 2 years later, we got to borrow money to rebuild the building that we just paid off the last 2 years. I'm just trying to understand that. I mean, I'm not a fan of extending payment terms. I'm not a fan of 84-month car loans. So that adds, can you show us, or maybe I'm jumping ahead, the amount of debt we incur doing this?
Well, yeah, that's what I was just going to show you. So,
okay.
So the benefit of stretching it out a year or 2 or 3 is that you have a slightly lower payment, right? So think 30-year mortgages versus a 15-year mortgage. You know, most people do a 30-year because it's as a more affordable payment. But the con of doing that is you're going to pay more interest over the life. So if you're looking in the orange column here, look at the total debt for just the orange. It's $35 million. Okay, so that's if you do the longer term. If I go back up to the previous page, if you do the shorter term, you can see the payments are going to be a little bit higher in the out years, but it's about, you know, $3 million less in total cost over the life of the debt. So with any of these decisions that we've always made for new money over the years, there's always a pro and a con. And so if you opted to keep the debt with the same final maturity, you know, it's going to save you somewhere between, you know, $2.5 and $3.5 million in interest over the life. So that's the pro. But it's just going to make it harder in the future if you have additional projects. And I can't speak to the projects, but it'll make it, you know, a little bit more challenging to do so. The other reason you'd consider locking in longer bonds today is because we're at all-time low interest rates. So if we know that, you know, at some point in the future, there's going to be debt in 2046 and 2047 and 2048, you know, maybe an advantage to lock that in now at today's very low rates versus, you know, waiting to see where interest rates are, you know, 4 or 5 or 6 years from now.
Yeah, that's 16 different boards in advance, but okay.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm just here to lay out the options. It doesn't matter to me which version you want to do.
Okay.
But we just want to present, you know, the option for everybody. So that's what's before us for the 2022 year. Now I'm going to quick skip to this last page, which is a timeline that we show you each time. And so in order to kind of get ready for a January bond sale to lock in the rates on the refinancing and the new money, you know, we're here tonight. You can see October 14th. You know, if you'd like us to proceed, typically how you've done this in the past is the finance committee, you know, generally just gives us a thumbs up, and then you wouldn't actually take action on a resolution until a future meeting. But the thumbs up can get the financing team started with all the paperwork that we need to do. November 11th was the next board meeting. So that could be the first possible date for a debt resolution. Debt resolution would be done as two separate resolutions, one for the refinancing, one for the new money. And it would take, be the board action that we need in order to kind of continue to prepare. And then when we are ready, we have the credit rating, we have all the offering documents, and we're into January, into the new year. We would then be able to price the bond issues via competitive internet sale. We're estimating the earliest we could get to market would be about January 11th, under this timeline for the step one. And then the step two would be approximately 16 days later. And then that would have money in the bank for the district for the projects about the 1st of March 3rd, we're estimating here. So that would be the timeline if you did want to move forward with all this kind of over the next 3 or 4 months. Okay, so I'll pause. Other questions, thoughts?
I'm not seeing any hands raised, Zach. Do
Okay.
you have more to discuss in this presentation?
No, I think that's about it.
I'll ask, does anyone on the call, board members on the call, have a objection to this being on the next board meeting agenda, or an objection to the overall refinancing and new issue altogether?
I do, Mark. I think we ought to wait till we have our full-time business administrator in there.
The only thing I'll add to that is, we have had numerous calls with Jason to kind of go through all this to bring him up to speed, as well as Bob and Robert, if that's of any help.
Yeah, I just echo that. We've had the full team, including Mr. Harris, on these calls. I think our most recent call maybe was this past Tuesday or so. So we've had the full team as part of these conversations.
So I'm hearing one objection from Mike. Anybody else want to speak up?
Hand, Mark.
You do.
Here, I'll stop
Okay.
sharing here so you can see everybody.
I'm sorry, Ed. Go ahead, Ed Tate.
Yeah, thank you. I tried to raise, it says I raised my hand, but anyway.
Yeah, you do. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. I think this is a great opportunity to refinance. I just want to ask Mr. Willard, when we look at the numbers for long-term repayment, I mean, I think it's incredible to see that we could have a lower capital debt payment in less than 3 years. All this nets out the cost of refinancing, correct?
Correct. So whether it's the refinancing or the new projects, it's always net of two things. It's net of the costs associated with either. And in the refinancing case, it's also net of the state reimbursement you get. Because when you refinance something and save money, the state wants their share of that savings back. So it's net of both of those.
Yeah, that makes sense. And just ballpark, what does it cost to refinance bonds to the extent that we're talking about?
Well, typically on a $10 million issue, I'd say the issuance costs are probably around $150,000. Now, a lot of that comes down to the day of the internet auction. We bid this out to all the different Wall Street banks, and whoever the winning bidder is going to bid a fee, and they're going to bid interest rates. And depending on what the net number between the two is, that's how we pick the low bid. So depending on if they have a little bit of a higher fee, but lower interest rates, or they have slightly higher rates, but a lower fee, kind of shakes out. But that's the main cost when you do these is it's called the underwriter's discount. We don't know that until the day of the auction. But about, 150,000 is a good ballpark number.
That makes sense. It seems like the fiscally responsible thing for us to do. So good work. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tate. Anyone else? Okay, not hearing anyone else, I'll just state that I am certainly a go for the refinance. I don't think I'm going to be supporting the new bond issue for the reasons that are obvious as far as the use of the funds. And And I do agree with Dr. Thorworth that I'd like to have a full-time business administrator in. But I think you'll still have the support of the board, even with our 2 objections. So hearing that, I think unless anybody's wants to challenge me here, I'm going to say that you can move to the next steps. Anybody else have a comment on that? Okay.
Okay, so you'd like us to get bond counsel and prepare for a November debt resolution?
Well, I'm looking at the list of everyone here, and we have Ms. Marcel, Mr. Tate, Mr. Solomon, Mr. Block. So is that 5 already? Yeah, I think you're in good shape with that. And again, any objections? Okay.
Okay,
Thank you, Zach.
sounds good. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, everyone. Talk to you soon.
Thanks, Zach.
Thanks, Zach.
Exactly.
Okay. All right.
Okay, next.
Go ahead.
Next up on the agenda is the presentation from Cornerstone. So I will turn it over to Kevin at this point in time. Kevin, are you there? If you're speaking, you're muted.
My apologies. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
We can now.
Okay, my apologies. So thank you all for having us here. I apologize for not being on camera. I didn't make it quite back to the office, so I'm on the side of the road. But if we can go, this is the cash management update. If we can go to the next slide. I'm not sure who's.
Matt, can you advance to the next slide?
Kevin, we're on the Treasury yield curve slide. If
Oh,
you're watching on YouTube, there's about an 8 to 12 second delay.
Okay, great. Thank you. So what you can see on the Treasury yield curve is that at the short end, where we are investing the district's money, interest rates continue to be incredibly low. And that's the gray line where you can see over, 1 month, 3 month, 6 month, even out to a year, interest rates are still, in the 0.1% type range. But what I think most people are feeling right now is if you look further out where the gray line, which is as of the end of the quarter, versus the blue line, which is as of the end of the year, the gray line's starting to move up. Interest rates have started to normalize for a couple reasons. Number one, with the reopening of the economy after COVID, there is expected to be more growth. But the part most people are feeling right now is some of the inflationary pressures in the economy. So whether it's the cost of gas or the inability or the new cars, things are more expensive today than they were pre-COVID, and for a lot of different reasons, which we could get into if you were so inclined. But that at the short end, the Federal Reserve really controls those interest rates. They dictate that. The market further out is saying, well, interest rates should probably be higher. So if we jump 2 pages ahead to the top, it says dot plot. This is a little bit of a busy chart, but basically what you're looking at is all of those red dots are where different members of the Federal Open Market Committee think short-term rates are going to be in 2021, in 2022, and in 2023. And then that dashed line is where the market thinks short interest rates are going to be. And you can see both are in agreement on an increase in rates over, the relatively short time of a couple of years. But even since this particular slide was put together, over the past couple of weeks, the expectations for the Federal Reserve to have to raise rates sooner rather than later has been increasing. And right now, where, if you asked 3 to 4 months ago, we would have said the Fed will be raising rates in late 2022. The market's now pricing in an even odds that will happen, by the time this fiscal year ends, so June of 2022. Barring any, there are obviously some things in the horizon, including the debt ceiling, which needs to be rediscussed in December. But if things continue to open the way they are, we would expect rates to move up in the intermediate term, short to intermediate term here. And that's a positive. So as from the last conversation, as borrowers, you do not want rates to move up very quickly. In this conversation, being the asset holders, the cash holders, you do want rates to move up. And as rates are moving up, there's the capability to be more tactical in how or in which of the approved managers or depository institutions the cash is going to. So if we go to the next slide, partners and current yields, all of these are relatively, benign. TD Bank has really kind of stepped up and maintained an above market yield right now. We've had several discussions with them, and their intention is to not lower that anytime soon. But the one thing that's important for the committee and board to just take note of is that Pliget and Pliget is run by PFM and custodied. So the assets are held at US Bank. PFM asset management, not Zach's team, not the folks who advise you on bonds and public financing, but the PFM asset management team is being sold to US Bank. That was announced in July. It is expected to close later this year. From all of our initial discussions, there are no issues, no concerns outside of what we've talked about many times. But it's certainly something that we are going to be keeping an eye on. And if you go to the following slide, and these are a lot of numbers, but I will just mention down in the transfer column where you see there was in general fund assets, there was a transfer out of Pliget to TD to try to drive some interest growth, but also to, as a start to maybe unwind that relationship even more. The yield isn't as competitive today, even though it will likely respond more quickly than TD would. But, with some of the uncertainty, we are working to make sure we limit exposure and, manage the risk there. Again, we do not believe that there's a red flag waving. It's at most a pink flag, something that we in the business office and the board should keep an eye on, but not recommending any drastic changes today. And then, if you look onto the next page, which has quarterly performance, this does look back to the end of the fiscal year. We're a little bit too early, probably a week too early for our September 30 numbers. But you can see when you look at all of these different letters and numbers and parentheses at the top, the numbers in parentheses are the peer group ranking. So compared to other taxable money markets, other vehicles available to the district, how do the chosen partner firms work with, compare against them? And you can see largely they're very favorable. The only one that really kind of jumps out in terms of interest is First National Bank in Newtown, and that's a very small piece of the relationship and one that doesn't hold much in the way of cash. But across the board, the returns, while they're not, on absolute in absolute terms, they're nothing to write home about. Certainly relative to the other options, we're getting our money's worth from the folks we have money invested with. And then the next several pages, we, outline the current holdings or current positioning of each of the partner firms. I'm not sure if anybody wants to get into great detail on that. They don't change extremely much from meeting to meeting, but rest assured everything's within investment policy guidelines and about as sure, as safe as humanly possible in today's low interest rate world. So I will ask if there are any thoughts or questions.
So Kevin, I don't see any hands raised. I have a question. It's Mark
Sure.
Smilik.
Sure.
You mentioned our investment policy statement. Can you tell me the last time we reviewed and or updated this and how often that should be done, please?
Yeah, it was late 2017, I believe, and it should be every 3 to 5 years. So we're about due on that.
Okay. So is that something you'll bring to this committee, I guess, in the beginning of next year as a recommendation to review?
Yeah. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I was part of the thinking was when the permanent business administrator comes on, that would be a perfect time to dig in, give a history, walk through the policy, make sure any changes are needed or taken care of, and then bring it to you in early 2022.
Sounds good. Well, as always, Kevin, we appreciate obviously your professional assistance in this. It's very, very valuable to the district in many ways, including at least a little bit more cash flow in the times that we're in right now, but certainly the legal and fiduciary assistance in that. So we appreciate that.
Well, thank you very much. And I hope everybody has a great evening and take good care. You know where to find us if you need us.
Okay. Still no hands. So I'm going to ask Bob to move on from here. Thank you again.
Right. Have a great night, everybody. Yep. Bye.
Okay, next up on the agenda, it's taking a look at how we ended last year, the 2021 year. We ended it strong. We ended it very successful. Revenues exceeded what we were budgeting for or expecting in terms of revenues, and expenditures actually underspent their budgets. And what I did on this slide is, I didn't go through every number, but I highlighted those major areas that really stood out, that had a major effect on how the district ended financially. So the strongest one, let's look at the revenue piece first, because what I should say is what had the largest effect on the positive gain that we had at the end of the year was due to revenues, more so than the expenditures. We received more revenues than what we were expecting. Earned income tax came at an all-time high. Would have been hard to project that. It would have been hard to see that coming. It was $5.4 million higher than what was in the budget. It was the highest year we've ever had. So that was substantial there. Real estate also came in strong at $4.1 million, more than what we budgeted. So the collection rate was strong, despite all the bad news, the bad karma that we've heard about the financial outlook right now in the country, in the area. Despite all the negative things that were happening out there, there were a lot of things that were still very positive. Earned income tax came in strong. Real estate came in strong. Transfer taxes came in strong, 2.2 million more than what we projected. And of course, some of the others were delinquent real estate tax and the debt service reimbursement. So those are some of the numbers. Those are our biggest drivers that helped the district come out very strong financially. Expenditure side, we look at the other side of the equation. Transportation was the largest area that came in under budget. We were always running services. Transportation wasn't running in the beginning of the year. There was disruptions there. And as a result, we spent close to $3 million less than what we had projected. Salaries also came in by almost $2 million less than what was projected as well. Again, some of that was changes in with your staff that you made, and those had a positive effect on where we ended. And then some of the others were, contracted subs, benefits, workers' comp, repairs and maintenance came in $500,000 less. Supplies also, just looking at those two, that's another $1 million right there. It adds up. When you add up all these numbers, it adds up. And our growth, our fund balance, and we'll see that on the next slide. But don't turn that just yet, Matt, because I'm not sure if we have any questions before I move on, which I'll throw out there now.
I don't see any hands.
Okay, then let's go to the next slide. So our fund balance grew by 13.4 million. That takes our fund balance up to 36.4 million. If you add that to the existing fund balance. Now, the first couple of items are committed and kind of set in stone. Inventory is non-spendable. Now that's 0.14 million. To balance the budget for this year, if you recall, the budget was looking for the general fund to use $1.3 million out of the fund balance to balance the budget. So we approved the budget that had more expenditures than revenues. So we have to show that to cover ourselves. We have to show that as committed fund balance. The unassigned, that's board policy to go 5% of what the budget is. That takes us to $12.5 million. That's the unassigned fund balance that the state's going to look at when they look at it, the funds that aren't committed that the district could utilize. And we have assigned fund balance. There's various accounts. Adding some of those accounts up, again, it's the 0.14, $144,000. Then we get into the areas where we're looking for commitments to divvy up the rest of the money. We were looking at doing $4 million of future educational initiatives. And then I'll jump down, we'll come back to COVID. We're looking at transferring capital reserves, $3.5 million for capital projects for the summer. With the remaining of the fund balance coming in at about $14.8 million. So we would be looking for the board to accept this, approve the transfer to the capital reserve fund. This is a piece that we need to finish up to keep the process going. When I say the process going, our audited financial statements. This will be reflected in the audited financial statements, what the commitments are, any transfers that were there. We can't leave it there in unassigned fund balance. We need to finish up the annual financial report. This is a part of it. And also, really, just to stay in compliance with the Securities and Exchange Commission, we need our audited statements done because the audited statements need to be submitted by December 27th. So all of these things are coming up, and we're at that point where we have to wrap up the audit. And these are suggestions and recommendations that administration is making. We discussed it with the head of finance committee, with Mark, and Dr. Fraser also was involved in these conversations. So with that, I'll throw that out for questions or discussion.
I don't see any raised hands. Can, Dr. Frazier, do you have any comments on this that you'd like to make?
Just first and foremost, to echo the recommendation that Mr. Bruchak just made. And the other piece, I guess, is that from a capital reserves fund, this is, you saw the presentation earlier from PFM where there was a reference to CIP projects and some borrowing that we'll be looking at for some of those summer maintenance projects. We do have a bit of a backlog of those projects. So this 3.5 million is really welcome for us to put in here. And Mr. Bialik, I wanted to take the time, I guess, to thank you because you gave me a call yesterday advocating. I was throwing out the number 1 million, and you called and said, hey, why don't we think about bumping that up to 3.5, which I think is a fantastic idea. And so certainly grateful for that. And then the other piece, of course, is with the upcoming election and having at least a third of our board changing over, really important to the district to maintain flexibility with this money. So while we're putting 4 million into future educational initiatives and almost 15 million in the COVID expenditures, the reality of this is that we are going to have substantial flexibility with all of that money. And I think that's the way it should be with a new board to be seated here in really less than 2 months at this point. Thank you,
Dr. Frazier. I see Mr. Solomon has his hand raised.
Yeah, I was going to actually lower it as Dr. was talking because he kind of answered my questions. But Mark and I spoke yesterday, and we talked about the CIP fund, and we know that we, with only raising taxes 1.9%, or that's what the board decided on, we did slight the CIP fund. So, Mark, yeah, my hat's off to you for when we discussed this. I think that's a great place to put it. The buildings are getting older and the new ones are new, obviously, but there's a lot of repair work in the backlog for Doug. Very smart. We have the money to do it. I really appreciate that line of thinking. And I'm really excited about the $4 million going into educational initiatives. Dr. Frazier, I think, that should position the administration to come up with some ideas of what they want to do with it. And then obviously, I love the idea of flexibility for the new coming board to have that availability to take a look at it from a different lens than the current sitting board, and give them the flexibility to do that. So hats off to you guys that put this together. I really, really look forward to having great conversations, knowing that we do have the flexibility built in for the future boards. So thanks again for that.
Thank you, Mr. Solomon. I'll just comment, since I don't see any other hands, that we did talk about this quite a bit, and the COVID-19 expenditures seem to be the correct place for the majority of the flexible funds that the new incoming board can work with, because the concessions that we received from our staff, the reduced revenue projections, the increased expenditures that we had prudently, so both on the income and the revenue side, I think, income and the expense side, I think Mr. Stone did a very, very good job of prudently projecting those numbers. That was because of COVID. So it made sense when we were looking at where can we put this. When the board comes in and removes a significant amount of money out of the COVID-related expenses, I don't think anybody's going to get upset about moving some into future educational initiatives or even in the capital reserves. And I don't know if anybody mentioned it, but the issue with putting more money into the capital reserves fund section is that we cannot move that back out. That's something I was reminded of by our finance group. So that's helpful. But this $3.5 million is in addition to the $2 million that we've been budgeting. So if that continues going into next year with the new board, we should have $5.5 million for capital projects, the summer projects, the maintenance. But I appreciate everybody's work on that. I think it's a good plan. Mr. Block?
Thanks, Mr. Bialik. Number one, this is a great windfall. And I'm not sure, Mark, you're the only one who was here when I started because Denise isn't here. Robert was. I think this is by far the largest fund balance position that we've seen in the last probably 8 to 10 years, right?
I'm not sure. I think it might have been a little higher, but
I think we were north of 30, 32 was the tops. But irregardless, it's a great windfall. I appreciate some of your suggestions over the last day to focus on investments in the CIP. I think Wendy Thomas would be particularly happy that we're focusing on education, Robert. And I like the idea of giving flexibility to a new board as they're seated. I will take the opportunity to say that I don't think this was totally unforeseen. I wish that we had recognized that some of the numbers and some of the planning we were doing was conservative, and that as some of the results were coming in, that they were better. I'm thankful that we were able to change course and do Sol Finestone. But I can't sit here, but not think about, hey, is there a possibility that we could have taken advantage of the joint bid that I had asked for and that we had done and that came back so favorable to do everything and be in a position where everything was rolling. So hindsight's 2020. What I'd like to encourage, future boards is, to be really careful about how they talk about finances. And, we were in just a situation through the last the last election cycle where we were in financial crisis, according to some. And here we see one of the biggest windfalls we've ever had. Not all of it foreseeable. And Mr. Stone, who I greatly respect, did a great job. But was, to his own word, very conservative in what he did. I just take hindsight as a guide going forward. Since we have this windfall for future boards, be careful about politicizing and screaming about crisis, because you might miss opportunities and you might put fear into the public or create division for no reason. So, just my commentary, not necessarily looking for something to debate, but again, I think the plan is good and I support that plan going forward.
Thank you. I think Dr. Thorward had his hand up next.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'll just state that this is a large fund balance, and for those who have been listening for quite some time, when it comes to this fund balance, let's not forget where some of this money came from. And we squeezed some people to get this number, and I'm on record already, and I'll be on record tonight again to say we need to unsqueeze that and fix it. So I'm not celebrating this because we haven't righted a wrong in my mind. Thanks.
Mr. Tate.
Thanks, Mr. Bialik. I'll be brief. I like Mr. Solomon's comments a lot, and I agree. It's great to see $4 million into future educational initiatives and 3.5 into the CIP. Just to keep beating the drum. As chair of facilities committee, I think it's incumbent upon us to address deferred maintenance, and this is really a major step forward. So I think it's really commendable. Thank you, Dr. Fraser. And I think it also proves, as Mr. Block was saying, that this district has a long history of very conservative financial management that Dr. Fraser and Mr. Stone continued. And we've never been in a financial crisis, and this proves that our very conservative fiscal management is paying dividends. Some of it, some of it's a nice surprise. Some of it's a result of very good financial management, and I'm proud of this. So thank you.
Ms. Marcel.
Thank you, Mr. Bialik. I wanted to just agree with what Mr. Solomon said earlier. I really like the flexibility for the future board for this. So thank you for working with Dr. Fraser to get this done. And I support it. I did have a quick question for Dr. Fraser, more so for the public, to just explain a little bit about the future educational initiatives. I know that Mr. Salomon and I have talked a lot about wanting a fifth special at the elementary level, and I just was hoping that Dr. Fraser, you could just share a little bit about maybe how that money would help Council Rock in the future.
Dr. Fraser, you're muted.
We could go back to the question later if anyone else has a comment. Oh, there he is.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Fraser, Ms. Marcel had a question about the, I'll let you repeat your question, Ms. Marcel.
Oh, Dr. Fraser, your microphone, you're muted.
Thank you. So sorry, I had to take a phone call there.
It's okay. So I just was talking about generally how I think this is great. There's good flexibility for the future board. And I was saying that I just for the public was hoping that you could share a little bit about the future educational initiatives. And how Mr. Salomon and I have talked a lot about the fifth special at the elementary level. And I just was hoping that you could just share with the public, kind of how those initiatives can help the district, like just kind of helping to color that in a little bit for folks that might be tuning in.
Absolutely. It's been way too long since we've had a chance to talk about the good stuff of education. So I appreciate that question. So one of them is, and perhaps at the top of the list, is that fifth special at the elementary level, a STEM based special, which I think our kids will benefit from tremendously and enjoy tremendously. Carries a price tag, almost all staffing of approximately $1 million. And obviously the kind of money that we're looking at on this screen and that we're talking about, as big as these numbers are and as wonderful as they are, it's all one-time money. So once it's spent, it's spent. So for instance, with that fifth special, what we would look to do is we could have a plan where we set aside $3 million and of this money and allow us to phase in from a budgetary standpoint, paying for that program. So year one, wouldn't even need to take any of it from the general budget. We could use the full $1 million from this fund balance. Year two, increase our operating budget by $200,000, pull $800,000 from this fund balance. Year three, $400,000, $600,000, and continue on down the line. So that by the time we get to year six, we are fully funding the program in the operating budget and able to do so in a sustainable way. So really exciting opportunity, because that fifth special would be so important for our kids, so beneficial for them, and frankly fill in a gap that I feel we have, not from a standard standpoint so much, but just from a what excites our kids and what so much of the world is moving towards, and the critical thinking that's involved in the problem solving that's involved in the STEM fields. This is just a really, really important addition to our K-6 programming. And the reality is, without us having a situation like this, I don't think we would have had any shot at implementing that next year. I think it would have been exceptionally difficult to do. And now I think we have a very real conversation in front of us about that, and a very real opportunity. And really say the same thing about Rock Block at the high school level. That it's been a couple of years now, I think, since we've talked about it. But that's a really great opportunity for our high school students. The modified AV block schedule at the high school is another, more expensive than Rock Block. We would love for those two things to go hand in hand with each other. So there's just pieces like that that are connected to our strategic plan. At some point, not too soon, because we're dealing with enough, but at some point, start times and the price tag that would be associated with that, if we would move in that direction. So really just a lot of opportunities for us that you have to be able to afford them, and you have to be able to afford them for the long term. And so again, I don't think we turn that spigot on all at once and just say, okay, we're going to increase the operating budget by $1 million in 1 year to have that fifth special. And this sort of money that we're looking at here allows us to not have to do that. Set aside $3 million over a period of 6 years. You have it fully operationalized, sustainable, and most importantly, a wonderful, wonderful thing for our students.
Well, thank you so much. That was very helpful, and thank you just for taking the time. I know that Mr. Bialik and you spent time going through these numbers, and just appreciate you both. I said that also, but I wasn't sure if you heard. So, so thank you. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Frazier. Thank you, Mark. And
yeah, and I agree too. I mean, the one thing I didn't mention earlier was, and Mr. Bialik, I want to just give you credit here again, is we sort of had with the work that we were doing administratively earlier this week, those numbers flip-flop between future ed initiatives and COVID-19 expenditures. And so that was part of the conversation that Mr. Bialik and I had yesterday as well. And for the reasons that Mark, you already articulated, it makes far more sense to have that larger number in the COVID-19 expenditures. We know that we're not going to have 15 million or $14.8 million of COVID expenditures. And that just speaks to the flexibility, and whenever that money gets moved to wherever, for whatever, it's not going to be controversial, and it shouldn't be controversial, because it's coming from COVID, and the savings really in large part wouldn't have happened without COVID. So thanks for saying that, Mrs. Marcel, and I agree completely.
Thank you both. Thank you, Dr. Frazier. Before we move on, I just want to have my own comments and comment on some of the things that were said regarding the projections. Here's what we don't have this evening. This is a one-time look of something that occurred over the past year, and we talked about the reduced revenue projections, and we had increased expense projections, and it prudently so, as I said, and it worked out the other way. And we're very, very fortunate. But Council Rock is not immune to the global, regional, or local economic issues. And it is the correct thing to do to plan as though at some point we're going to get hit with an economic recession, and we can't just continue with rose-colored glasses thinking that we're always going to come out ahead, because at some time we're not going to be so lucky. I hope that's never the case, but at some time it's very, very likely. What we don't have tonight is the 5-year projections. So that is really where we had a lot of value from Mr. Stone, because it's easy to just look and say, my goodness, this is a lot of money. Let's just put the pedal to the metal and get things done, because there is a lot to do. But without those 5-year projections, it's really hard to make a prudent decision. And I'm curious as you know, to what this windfall is going to cause. I mean, are we now in the black for the remaining 5 years? That would be a great thing. Are we still seeing red during that 5-year period? I'm not sure. I did talk briefly with Mr. Borchak about that. Obviously, it's not something that he could put together for this meeting. Maybe we have it for the board meeting. I'd love to see positive numbers, but I want to throw in my own caution. And I want to caution any incoming board to be mindful of the fact that Council Rock is not an island, and Council Rock will at some point have its own economic issues, and we have to be mindful of that. So thank you, everyone, and we can move on.
Mark, sorry, can I make a quick comment?
Sure.
So I'm glad you brought that up. The 5-year projection tool is key. You know, when used appropriately, and going back to my earlier comments about understanding that's a tool and an input. I probably won't be on, I know I won't be on the board when we see it next time. But I also, like you, to encourage the board to utilize that, because when we were doing 5-year projections, not the same tool with Bob, you know, we knew that we were going to be running deficits, and we took actions to change those courses, to Mr. Tate's point, about the skill, the strength, and the history of fiscal responsibility in the district. So I appreciate those comments about playing this thing out. But again, playing those things out simply is a tool to help us to act as opposed to anything else. So thanks.
Very good. Thank you. Mr. Borshak?
Okay, I'll summarize some of the other funds. As we all know, the capital reserve and capital projects funds were very active this past year. We borrowed $25 million for the various projects that we've been working on. Some of the elementary buildings, the turf field. So those funds have increased and also decreased significantly this past year, and that's pretty much going to be the course over the next several years as we're borrowing funds. If we continue with the projects, going back to the first part of this presentation tonight. Food service fund, that's actually a typo. We did not lose money this year. We broke even. So I'm happy to report that. Medical fund, the healthcare fund has been increasing. That's something that we'll take a stronger look at, looking at premiums and the benefits and things like that. And also the student activities funds, also that's a fiduciary fund, but they do have significant balances in there. They're strong as well. I'm happy to report that. So the district is doing very well financially, even when you look at all the other funds and the other pieces that are also part of our financial report. So that takes us into budgeting for next year, the 22-23 budget. The Act 1 index is 3.4%. That would garner a revenue if you took it all the way up and increase it by the 3.4%. That would bring in about $5.6 million of additional real estate revenues. And the next slide. Some of the things that will be affecting us, revenue collections. Again, revenue collections were strong. Will that be strong next year? How will the economy do? There's still a lot of shaky things that are happening out there. Employee costs, those are always we are a labor intensive industry. So our biggest expense is salaries and benefits. So of course, employee costs will be the driving factor of putting the budget together. And of course, we do have that other piece out there, the increased charter school costs. That's plaguing most schools across not only the state, but the country. Certainly, Council Rock is no different. Bucks County schools are no different. And charter schools can continue to put a financial strain on us. So that'll be another piece of the budget that we'll be taking a strong look at. Looking at the budget timeline.
I'm sorry, I've got my hand up. Can I just ask a quick question on that last slide?
Yes.
Increased charter school costs. Dr. Frazier, could you give us and the public a quick update on where our numbers were, high point of COVID, where they came down to, and then kind of where they've migrated since the beginning of the year through some of the debates we've had over health and safety plan?
Yeah, I'll do my best. I don't have those numbers.
Sorry to spring that on you.
No, it's okay. It's okay. I want to say our high point last year was somewhere around 130, 135 students, somewhere in that neighborhood. Pre-pandemic, we were, I believe, at 70 or in the low 70s. And now some of those students, when we saw the increase in the 2021 school year with the pandemic, some of those students graduated out, but we also did some really significant work in terms of recruiting students back. And at one point we had that count in the mid 70s. We were just a handful or so students above our pre-pandemic number. And at this point, we're certainly not the whole way back to 130 or 135. We might be somewhere around 110 or 115. Again, I don't have those numbers in front of me. So we are lower than what we were last year. But at one point there over the summer, we were able to get that number down, like I said, into the 70s.
And has it crept back up through the year? At the
I
start of
have
this year?
not taken a look at it since I last shared numbers with the board in one of the updates. So that would require a fresh look.
Okay, great, thanks.
Okay, I'll just hit on some of the key areas in the timeline. January 6th is the first one that's coming up. That's when, if the board wants to approve opting out with the opt-out resolution, in other words, you're not going to increase taxes higher than the index. You won't be applying for exceptions. If I look at what the state requirements are on the timeline versus the board meeting, that should be done at the January 6th board meeting. February 3rd would be the approval of a preliminary budget and notice of intent to apply for exceptions if the board chooses to go down that path and does not do the opt-out resolution in January. The 21st is when we would actually file for exceptions with PDE, again, if we choose that path. And then the 18th of March is the deadline to submit referendum question to Bucks County, the election, I'm sorry, Board of Elections. And then finally, if we look out to May, we will be approving the proposed final budget. And the final budget would be approved June 16th. The proposed final budget would be approved. It has to be approved at least 30 days before that. We'd be looking at the May 5th board meeting to do that. So that would keep us in compliance, looking at the timeline that the state puts out versus when our board meets and when the board would have to take action on various parts of the budget.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Bob. Any questions or comments from the board? All right. Bob, moving on.
That's it.
Okay. Any final comments or questions from the board or the administration?
I would just say, nice job, Mr. Bruchak, explaining this this outcome, being new in the role and getting to know things so fast. So thanks for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, nice job. I want to clarify something. So I made an error when I was talking about the number of board members who were okay with moving the bond item forward. And I was, so we had 4 board members who were okay with that and not 5. I was in conversation with Dr. Frazier. This is just for the rest of the board and the public. I was in conversation with Dr. Frazier and our president and vice president. And Dr. Frazier reached out to our solicitor, Rob Cox. And that's why I believe he didn't hear Ms. Marcel's question the first time, because he was on the phone with Rob trying to address this issue. But we were assured by our solicitor that we're still able to move forward to the next step because it's really not, I'm assuming, an official action. It's just kind of a thumbs up. And frankly, knowing that Ms. Brooks and Mary Ann would probably move forward, Ms. McKee would probably move forward, I would lend my support to just move the ball down the line a little bit for that. But so I just want to clear the air on that. If anybody had any questions, I didn't see any come up, but just to make sure everybody's good with that. Ed, Tate?
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that, Mr. Bialik. That's the way I understood when we went to this committee system. that's the way I understand things were going to work. That committees were going to review proposals, but didn't necessarily need an affirmative vote to move an administration recommendation forward. So I'm glad to hear that. And I think it makes perfect sense. And I'm glad this will go to the full board. So thanks for doing that.
Yeah, well, my only concern, frankly, was that Zach has to hire bond counsel. So that's a cost. I just wanted to make sure that we're covered that way. That's why I had Dr. Frazier ask Mr. Cox.
Yeah, well, okay, that makes perfect sense. Thank you.
Very good. Okay, any other questions or comments from anyone? All right, it's 8.